Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. 50,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for all the love and support. Exactly a year back, I started making videos on DevOps and cloud on this channel. And from then, there was no turning back. You people have constantly showered love. You people have always given me the right feedback. And you people are the ones who made this channel so popular. So I promise you that I am going to make more such interesting content on this channel. Each and every day, I try to improve myself and I try to give my best. And I will continue to do this throughout the life of this channel. I'll try to give you best content that is possible. And saying that, there is also going to be a surprise. I'm going to make that video. Probably I'll post that video on the weekend. So there will be a giveaway for 50,000. For reaching this 50,000 subscriber feet. So I'll decide what exactly I want to do, and I'll come up with the exact details, and I'll post that video over the weekend. So again, thank you so much for all the love and support. This means the world to me, and I promise you good content going ahead. So let's get on to the topic for today, that is day 13 of AWS Zero to Hero series. You might be thinking now, why am I not sharing my screen and why am I talking? So I'll explain you. I'll share my screen and I'm going to present you. But before that, what are we going to learn today? So today's topic is going to be on AWS Code Pipeline. In the last class, I have explained you about AWS Code Commit, and I've explained you very clearly that there are four parts or four major services that AWS offers for the continuous integration and continuous delivery. What are they? AWS Code Commit, AWS Code Pipeline, AWS Code Build, and AWS Code Deploy. And we will cover these four videos or four services in four videos, right? And I told you that I will also do a demonstration of using all of these AWS services and implementing the CI/CD pipeline. So as part of that, yesterday we learned about AWS Code Commit, and today I'll explain you about the AWS Code Pipeline. And this one, to make it very easy for the viewers, what I have planned is I will try to compare this with a very popular open source CI platform that is available, that is Jenkins. I think most of our subscribers, viewers, or even who are new to DevOps, they must have heard about Jenkins, and you at least know something that Jenkins is an orchestrator. If you don't know the concept of CI/CD, or if you are not aware of Jenkins, I'll put the link in the description of the playlist called CICD, Continuous Integration and Continuous Delivery, where you can learn CI/CD right from basics. And I'll highly recommend you to watch that playlist before watching this video. At least watch the first two episodes of it, where I've explained about the introduction part of CI/CD and how does the CI/CD work. Okay, so now in today's video, I'll compare AWS Code Pipeline with Jenkins so that you people will be easily able to correlate. And when I do the demonstration tomorrow or day after, because I might take another day to explain you about the AWS code build, I might do a very simple project tomorrow, and day after tomorrow, we will use all the components, all the four services, and implement the end-to-end CI/CD demonstration on AWS. So let me share my screen and explain you about the AWS code pipeline. But firstly, I'll try to explain it using Jenkins so that the picture will be very, very clear to you. Okay, so now let me get the board. Perfect. I hope you are seeing the right screen. Uh, the other day, I think I posted a wrong video. I had to delete it and re-upload. So I'm being very cautious about the screen sharing now. Okay, so you are seeing a green board right now. And how does a usual CI/CD work with Jenkins? Okay, so Jenkins is an open source platform. There is also an enterprise cloud-based support, but many organizations use Jenkins. And how does the workflow begin? Basically, there is a source code repository. Let's consider it as a GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab or anything that adheres to the principle of version control system, mostly the principles of Git. There is a target platform that is called Kubernetes, or the target platform can also be a virtual machine, but these days everything is on Kubernetes, right? People are moving towards Kubernetes. So there will be a user. Let's call this user as a developer. And what happens in a usual world scenario is that this user makes a code commit. This is not AWS code commit. This is a general code commit, right? If you are a Java developer, if this Git repository is hosting the Java code, or if this Git repository is hosting the Python code, and let's say you are working in this organization, and the user who is developer makes a code change, right, and push the code change to the Git repository. Now, for easy understanding, let me call it as GitHub. So there is a user who made a code change. Let's say he made a change to the HTML file, or he made a change to one of the .java files, and he commits the code to the Git repository. What happens after that is the major picture, or the main orchestrator comes into the picture, that is Jenkins. Okay, why I'm taking example of Jenkins? Because I hope many people will correlate to this, and Jenkins is the most widely used tool at this point of time. At the point of making this video, Jenkins is the most used CI platform. So this GitHub, the DevOps engineers, that is you and me, we configure a webhook that triggers the Jenkins pipeline. Okay, what is a Jenkins pipeline? The code that we write in Jenkins. We write declarative pipelines or scripted pipelines in Jenkins in the Groovy scripting. And what these pipelines do is they are typically responsible for two actions. One is continuous integration, and the second thing is to invoke the continuous delivery. Watch this very carefully. I said for implementing continuous delivery and implementing continuous integration and invoking continuous delivery, right? One is implementation, other is invoking, because Jenkins is more or less a continuous integration platform only. Jenkins is not responsible for continuous delivery, but Jenkins invokes the continuous delivery, right? And exactly same thing I'm going to explain through CodePipeline, AWS CodePipeline as well. So listen to it very carefully. So what Jenkins does here is, whenever developer makes a code change and GitHub webhook triggers the Jenkins pipeline that you have written, a declarative Jenkins pipeline that you have written, that implements the continuous integration first. What is continuous integration? In the continuous integration, you have multiple stages. That is, in the declarative continuous pipeline that you have written, the Groovy scripting that you have written implements code checkout, right? Implements build and unit test cases. So this stages depends upon organization to organization, right? One organization might have many, one organization might have slightly less. So it depends upon organization to organization. But I'm trying to present the most widely used stages. Then you can implement the static code analysis, SAST, DAST. You can use tools like SonarQube for implementation. And don't worry if you are finding this difficult. Like I told you, please go to the description and click on my CICD playlist. There are 10 videos in the CICD playlist. And with that 10 videos in the playlist, you can master the complete CICD, right from basics, right from understanding what is CICD to implementing CICD by yourself. Then there is basically a Docker image scanning, or right, there are stages regarding to the image creation. Then you have Docker image scanning, and finally there is a Docker image push stage. So these are multiple stages that are part of the continuous integration. And like I told you, these stages can increase, these stages can decrease. There is nothing like your continuous integration should have these stages only. Depend upon the application that you are using. Is it a mobile application? Is it a web application? Or is it related to ML? Is it related to AI? So depending upon the applications, your stages keeps changing. But for the purpose of understanding, I'm using these stages which are standard. And once the Docker image creation and Docker image is pushed for your microservice, then what Jenkins can do is it can invoke the continuous delivery process. Now there are multiple ways of invoking this continuous delivery process. One is you can use Ansible, which is an outdated way, or you can use some shell scripts, which is again an outdated way, or you can use platforms like Argo CD, which is GitOps based platform. So you can use Argo CD, or you can use Flux CD, you can use Spinnaker, you can use multiple GitOps platforms that are available in market. And GitOps is the best way of implementing continuous delivery. Maybe you might have learned CICD somewhere, and when you learned, people might have explained you CICD, or people might have demonstrated using shell scripts or Ansible, right? Once the Docker image is created, you can use shell script to write a Kubernetes YAML file and push this Kubernetes YAML file to a Kubernetes cluster, or you can create a Helm chart using some shell scripts or Python scripts, and again you can use the kubectl or Helm command to push it to one Kubernetes cluster. And in some cases, when there are multiple Kubernetes clusters, people recommend Ansible as well, so that using Ansible you can configure multiple Kubernetes clusters as hosts, and you can push them using the Ansible playbook. But the recommended approach is always using GitOps, because using GitOps, you can not only push the artifacts, not only push your Kubernetes related resources onto the Kubernetes cluster, but you can also constantly manage them, because GitOps tools can constantly reconcile. They are declarative in nature. They can always make sure that if someone modifies resources on the Kubernetes cluster, it will revoke the change, or it will put the change back to the state that is single source of truth, which is a Git platform. Now, I don't want to go into the details here because I have explained this thing in multiple videos. If you don't understand this concept, like I told you, please go and watch my CICD playlist. I'll put the link in the description. Now, this is about the Jenkins part, right? So what Jenkins is doing here primarily is it is acting as an orchestrator, where it is implementing the continuous integration, and it is either facilitating, or even in Jenkins, last stage of your Jenkins Groovy, you can use shell script or you can use Ansible, and you can implement the CD part as well. But mostly Jenkins is only invoking the continuous delivery. Now, let's try to understand this same workflow using AWS CodePipeline, so that you will understand CodePipeline in a very, very simple way. Again, there is a user. Now, let's say the requirement is for you to move this entire ecosystem onto AWS managed services. So what you will do is, again, firstly, there is a user, and now this user makes a code change, not to GitHub, but this user makes a code change to the AWS code commit, right? So if you compare this with the previous picture, what is happening here? The Git repository here is nothing but the AWS code commit, right? So this AWS code commit can be compared with GitHub or GitLab or any other version control systems, because AWS code commit is also a version control system, but this time here it is a managed version control system. It is a AWS managed version control system. So you don't have to worry about the downtime. You don't have to worry about scaling this up, increasing the resources of this version control system, or whenever you don't want it, you can shut down this version control system and you don't have to pay for it. Now, once this is done, what this AWS code commit triggers here, previously the GitHub was triggering a webhook. GitHub webhook was triggering a Jenkins pipeline. Here you will trigger a AWS code pipeline, right? So previously you were triggering the Jenkins pipeline, but here you are triggering AWS code pipeline. So Jenkins pipelines or Jenkins can be compared with AWS code pipeline service. Now you might ask me, Abhishek, if I'm getting Jenkins for free, if Jenkins is open source, open source version is available, now why should I pay for AWS code pipeline? Watch the video till the end. I'll explain you very clearly why you have to pay for AWS code pipeline. Not that you have to pay, why organizations are paying for AWS code pipeline, and I'll also explain you which is a popular choice as well. Okay. So now this AWS code pipeline takes the responsibility of invoking continuous integration and invoking continuous delivery. Here I said invoking continuous integration and also invoking continuous delivery. Last time in Jenkins I said implementing continuous integration and invoking delivery. But here what AWS code pipeline does is, in most of the cases, it will invoke the continuous integration using a service called AWS code build. So mostly this AWS code build, of course, you can write some scripts as well, but mostly what people do is they make use of this AWS code build to implement all the stages, right? What all the stages that are available, instead of writing them in the AWS code pipeline, like I'm telling you, you can also do it You can ignore AWS code build completely. You can write some scripts as well, but mostly the followed approach is people use AWS code build, and code build is responsible for all these continuous integration stages. And then there is something called code deploy, where code deploy will take care of the CD part, and it will deploy either to Kubernetes cluster or EC2 instances or ECS, whatever you would like to, right? So now, did you understand how does this AWS services fit into the places? When you try to compare it with Jenkins, in Jenkins integration part that I have explained you, Jenkins is working as an orchestrator. There is GitHub repository, there is Argo CD, and then there is Jenkins pipeline, right? These were the four things that I've explained in the diagram. Now there is AWS code pipeline, code commit, code deploy, and AWS pipeline. So if you compare both the pictures, you can go back, place both the pictures side by side, right? Then you will get the clear picture. And even the interviews, if the interview is very dedicated to AWS, if the job description or the company only wants AWS services, managed services for implementing CICD, you can easily tell them by keeping both of these pictures side by side, and you can create your own story. Of course, when I explain the entire implementation, you can also try them practically at your end on your AWS account. But for the purpose of today's video, if you want to visualize and if you want to understand, then this is the best way. So code pipeline is a very, very simple concept. If you know Jenkins, or if you know GitHub Actions, or if you know GitLab, then there is no difference here. AWS code pipeline will also act as an orchestrator. We will do the demonstration tomorrow using AWS code commit, or instead of code commit, I'll use a GitHub repository so that you will understand it in a much better way. And even in real time, code commit is a very, very less used managed AWS service. Because of its features, it does not offer as many features as GitHub or GitLab. So even if organizations are using code pipeline, code deploy, and code build, they most rarely use code commit. Instead, they use services like GitHub or GitLab. So tomorrow's video, I'll use GitHub repository. I'll put Java or Python code in the repository, and using code pipeline, I will invoke AWS code build, and I'll show you how to build this entire application. So tomorrow's video will only be restricted to this part, right? We will only be doing GitHub repository, AWS code pipeline, and AWS code build. So we will try to implement the CI part only. And in day after tomorrow's video, we will implement the CD part. And when we implement the CD part, because we already know the CI, we will do entire thing, that is CICD, continuous integration and continuous delivery. Now comes the important question is, okay, don't worry. You might be thinking, Abhishek, you did not show me AWS code pipeline practically on the AWS console. That's what we will do tomorrow. We will use AWS code pipeline, code build, and GitHub repository to implement continuous integration. Now comes the major question that you might ask me, Abhishek, if AWS code pipeline is chargeable and if it is a pay as you use service, whereas open source solutions like Jenkins are available, why organizations prefer AWS code pipeline? Not all organizations, but there are some organizations which are using code pipeline, right? You might ask me that, Abhishek, why they are using code pipeline if it is a pay as you go service? The reason is that, see, as a DevOps engineer, let's say you have installed Jenkins. And for Jenkins, definitely you will go with master slave architecture. For slaves, either you will use Docker agents, as I showed in the demonstrations on my channel, or you will use worker nodes, which are virtual machines. And if you are using worker nodes, virtual machines, what happens is you create a Jenkins instance. For 50 Jenkins pipelines, let's say you started with 2 worker nodes. Later tomorrow, your organization increased, the size grew up, the pipelines grew up. Now you have increased the worker nodes to 4, 8, 16, 20. And what will happen eventually is you have to manage this 20 virtual machines, right? You have to take care of this 20 virtual machines. When you have to take care, that means everything like managing, you have to take care of scaling of these instances, security patches. You have to constantly see if the nodes are healthy or not. If the nodes are unhealthy, you have to clean up the resources. You have to add resources to the nodes, right? So what is happening here? Managing is the thing that is taking place. So there have to be one dedicated DevOps engineer who has to take care of this entire Jenkins infrastructure. And whenever management comes into picture, you know what AWS does is AWS, whenever they see the opportunity, they will start their managed services. That's what we are learning from day one. AWS saw the opportunity for compute, they came up with EC2. They saw the opportunity for managing storage, they came up with S3. Now they saw the opportunity for managing CICD services. That's why they came up with code commit, code pipeline, code build, and code deploy. So what AWS says is you just use it. There are many lazy people that AWS know, and AWS says that, okay, you just use it and we will charge you according to your usage, right? So from the concept of EC2 instances, we are learning the same, and AWS is entirely surviving on this managing service concept and pay as you go service. Now there is no disadvantage with it, or AWS is not doing anything wrong, because sometimes if there are startups or if there are some small companies, they don't want to keep engineers for managing Jenkins, or they don't want to keep engineers for managing a particular services. So they will just go for AWS and say that, hey, AWS, you manage everything. I don't mind. End of the day, I need the output. And that is totally fine. Now, why Jenkins is a preferred solution in that case? Because Jenkins firstly is an open source. And for each and every organization, management is not that big problem, right? So for some companies, they can run entire Jenkins workloads on 2 EC2 instances, or on 2 worker nodes. If they are managing it efficiently using Docker slaves, I showed you in one of the video that's called Ultimate CICD pipeline, where I've used Docker agents. And what this Docker agent is doing, when the pipeline is run, the Docker agent gets started, and once the pipeline is completed, the Docker agent or the Docker container, that gets deleted, right? It gets removed completely. So that way you are efficiently managing the infrastructure of your Jenkins. So if there are efficient DevOps engineers, and if companies don't require to spin up virtual machines, right, in that cases, they don't have to use these services. And most of the times, people don't have problem with managing Jenkins or CI infrastructure. And the other thing is that you can also create this Jenkins on EC2 instances, right? When you create Jenkins on EC2 instances, you can configure auto scaling groups. You can configure the AWS CloudWatch. You can configure AWS alarms, and AWS will definitely take care of these EC2 instances, right? So if you want to spin up or if you want to scale up, then you can just go to your AWS console and you can scale up. So that way, even if you want to manage Jenkins, then AWS has solutions like EC2. So you can just spin up EC2 instances, configure auto scaling groups, and install Jenkins in them. So even that way, you can avoid using this AWS managed services. And this managed services, if you are not using them efficiently, the price will also go up, right? They are pay as you use. Let's say you forgot to shut down these things, or let's say you are not able to manage them efficiently, then the cost will also go high. And this major drawback, the major drawback of this entire AWS managed services is that they are very much restricted to AWS only. Tomorrow, let's say your organization did not like AWS and they want to move to Azure, or they are moving to hybrid cloud. That means they have some things on AWS and they have some things on Azure. Then all the pipelines that you have written will stop working, because your pipelines, that is AWS code pipelines that you have written, are only restricted to AWS. They will not work outside AWS. Whereas if you're using Jenkins, let's say you have created Jenkins on EC2 instance, you have written declarative Jenkins pipeline. Tomorrow, even if your organization says, hey, move away from Jenkins, you will just delete the Jenkins instance here, spin up another Jenkins instance there, and your pipelines will remain the same. You can just take backup of your Jenkins, and you can just say that, hey, these are my pipelines. You stored the pipelines in Git repository or somewhere, and you can reuse that pipelines even on Azure infrastructure, Google Cloud infrastructure, or even on premises. So this way, your entire costing, and this way the entire AWS infrastructure thing plays as a blocker, or plays as a crucial role for organizations to not use code pipelines and use Jenkins. Whereas if organizations like startups, they want to use managed AWS services only, then they will use AWS code pipeline. So if your interviewer is asking these questions, then you have to clearly mention them that why Jenkins is popular than AWS CodePipeline. If they're asking this question, one, you will say features of Jenkins, integrations of Jenkins. Jenkins can be integrated with lot of tools, and Jenkins is not restricted to AWS platform only. Tomorrow, if you want to move outside, you can move outside. And if someone is asking about advantages of CodePipeline, you will tell them that everything is managed by AWS, so I don't have to worry about it. Tomorrow, if cost is not a barrier for me, then even if scaling up of this AWS CodePipeline resources, scaling down, reliability, the management, everything is taken care by AWS, right? So this is about AWS CodePipeline, and wait for tomorrow's demonstration video where we will implement the continuous integration part using CodePipeline, code build, and GitHub repository instead of code commit. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please let me know in the comment section, how do you feel about this AWS managed services? And you might be thinking, Abhishek, if you say that Jenkins is a popular choice, GitHub Actions is a popular choice, GitLab is a popular choice, why should I learn about this? Because if there is an organization, if they want things to be completely in AWS, then it should not be a barrier for you. Because we are learning AWS zero to hero, it is also a good option to learn about AWS managed CICD services. I'll see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye. Thanks, everyone.